I am Maya, 34 years old, and a corporate strategist who buried her husband. After Marcus passed away, I dragged myself to my nephew's very first birthday party. Surrounded by 50 guests, my sister Chloe stood up, wiped away a fake tear, and announced that her son was my late husband's biological child. She slammed paper on the table claiming it was his will and demanded half of my $900,000 home as her inheritance. I just stared at her, pressed my lips together, and tried to hold back my laughter because the truth about my husband was something she could never have anticipated. Before I continue, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever watched a toxic relative dig their own grave. Growing up in Atlanta, image was everything. My parents, Pastor Thomas and Eleanor, treated our family reputation like a fragile glass sculpture to be protected at all costs. In their eyes, Chloe was the masterpiece, the former church pageant queen who could do no wrong. I was the sturdy, reliable background piece expected to quietly support her. This dynamic was on full display at the first birthday party for Chloe and her husband Liam. Liam was a white real estate broker whose arrogance took up all the oxygen in the room. He rented out the entire garden patio of a high-end country club for a 1-year-old who would never remember it. The venue was dripping with floral arrangements, custom balloon arches, and a huge dessert table that cost more than my first car. I knew Liam was swimming in terrible financial debt, but appearances had to be strictly maintained for my parents' church congregation and Liam's country club friends. I sat alone at a table near the back, wearing a simple black dress, suffocating under the heavy grief of losing Marcus just weeks prior. Marcus was a brilliant veterinarian, the only man who ever made me feel like I did not have to earn my place in the world. Being at this loud, flashy party felt like a betrayal to his memory, but my mother aggressively insisted my absence would spark church gossip. The afternoon dragged on with Liam loudly bragging to colleagues about his real estate deals, while Chloe floated between tables, soaking up compliments about her post-baby figure. When it was time for the cake cutting, the DJ turned down the upbeat music. The crowd of 50 people gathered around the massive tiered cake. Chloe tapped her manicured fingernail against her crystal champagne glass, the sharp clinking sound demanding immediate silence from the room. Liam stood right beside her chest, puffed out proudly holding their son. I watched from my isolated seat, expecting a dramatic speech about the profound blessings of motherhood and how flawless their lives were. Instead, Chloe handed her glass to a waiter and stepped to the center of the stone patio. She looked down at her expensive shoes for a long moment, allowing the uncomfortable silence to stretch and build tension. When she finally looked up, her eyes were brimming with tears. Not tears of joy, but a perfectly calibrated theatrical display of deep sorrow. She took a trembling breath and looked directly at me. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. A familiar cold dread washed over my body, the exact same feeling I used to get when we were teenagers, and she was about to frame me for something she had done. "Thank you all for coming today." Chloe began, her voice quivering with practiced vulnerability. "This past year has been a beautiful journey with my sweet baby boy, but it has also been a year of carrying a heavy, painful burden, a dark secret that has been tearing me apart from the inside." The guests exchanged confused, nervous glances. My mother, standing near the front, gripped her pearl necklace, clearly unaware of what was about to happen. Chloe pulled a folded document from her designer clutch. She clutched the paper against her chest like a lifeline. "With Marcus passing away so tragically, I realized I can no longer carry this weight alone," she continued, her voice echoing through the silent patio. "My son deserves to know his true legacy, and our family deserves the complete truth, no matter how hard it is to hear." She pointed a trembling finger straight at me. "I am so sorry, Maya. I never meant to hurt you, but my son is not Liam's child. My baby is my late husband's biological son." A collective gasp ripped through the crowd. Someone dropped a glass, the shattering sound piercing the heavy silence. My mother let out a strangled cry and grabbed my father's arm for support. I sat entirely motionless in my chair, staring blankly at the woman I shared blood with. Chloe unfolded the paper in her hands and held it up high for the shocked crowd to see. Marcus knew the absolute truth, she cried, wiping a tear that carefully avoided her makeup. He felt terrible about what we did behind your back. Before he died, he wrote this will to ensure his only child would be taken care of permanently. He left half of your house to his son. It is a $900,000 property, Maya, and as the mother of his child, I am stepping in to claim my son's rightful inheritance. Liam stepped forward, placing a heavy, patronizing hand on Chloe's shoulder, playing the forgiving husband. I looked at the fake tears rolling down my sister's cheeks, at the fraudulent document in her hand, and at the shocked faces of the church members who were already judging me. I closed my eyes for a fraction of a second. I pressed my lips tightly together, biting the inside of my cheek until I tasted copper, doing everything in my power to suppress the urge to laugh aloud. The silence shattered into a chaotic hum of whispers and gasps from the guests surrounding us. Church elders exchanged scandalized looks while my parents stared at me with pure horror. Chloe stood triumphant in the center of the patio, holding the single sheet of paper high above her head like a trophy. She took a step toward my table, her heels clicking against the stone floor. She slammed the document down right next to my water glass. "Read it yourself," she demanded, her voice trembling with that perfectly rehearsed vulnerability. "It has his signature. He wanted his boy to have his childhood home." I looked down at the paper. It was a standard legal template printed on basic copy paper. At the bottom sat a signature that vaguely resembled the way Marcus signed his name, but the loops were entirely too sharp. It was a clumsy forgery. I did not reach for it. I did not even lean forward. I kept my hands folded neatly in my lap, keeping my breathing slow and measured. I refused to give them the hysterical reaction they desperately wanted. Before I could say a word, Liam stepped up behind Chloe and placed his hands on her shoulders. He wore a tailored navy suit that screamed old money, a stark contrast to the massive credit card debt I knew he was hiding. He looked down at me with an expression of deep, patronizing pity. He puffed out his chest, standing tall to use his physical presence as an intimidation tactic. "Maya, we know this is a shock for you," Liam said, his voice booming, just loud enough for the garden patio to hear. He adopted the tone of a teacher explaining a simple concept to a slow student. "We did not want to drop this on you so soon after the funeral. But blood is blood. We have to honor what Marcus wanted." I tilted my head slightly, meeting his gaze. "You want half of my house, Liam." He offered a tight, condescending smile. "It is not about what I want, Maya. It is about taking care of this family. Look, you have been through a traumatic ordeal. You are a grieving widow. A large property is a massive undertaking for a single woman to manage alone. The property taxes, the maintenance, the legal liabilities are just too much for you to handle right now. You are not in the right headspace." He unbuttoned his suit jacket and crossed his arms. "As a licensed real estate broker, I deal with high-value estates every single day. I know how these complex assets work. I will step in and act as the property manager for Chloe's half of the estate. I can handle the title transfer, the deed restructuring, and all the heavy lifting. You will not have to worry your pretty head about any of the complicated legal paperwork. We will make this transition as smooth and painless as possible for you." The sheer audacity of his microaggressions hung heavy in the warm Atlanta air. He was standing there, a white man with a failing career, looking down at a black corporate strategist who managed multi-million-dollar financial risk portfolios for a living, and telling me I was incapable of understanding a basic property deed. He was banking on my supposed ignorance. He was banking on my grief. Most of all, he was banking on his perceived superiority to steamroll me into signing away my home right here in front of our community. "You are going to manage my property?" I asked, keeping my tone entirely devoid of emotion. Liam chuckled, a short, dismissive sound. "Let us be realistic, Maya. You are a corporate employee, not a real estate investor. You do not understand how the market fluctuates or how to leverage a property of that size. Plus, considering the emotional state you are in, you need a professional to take the reins. I have the resources and the network. I will draw up the equity split documents by Monday morning. You just need to sign them. I will even waive my standard broker fees because we are family. Chloe leaned against him, dabbing her dry eyes with a tissue. We just want what is fair, Maya. Marcus loved my son. He wanted to provide for him. You cannot be greedy and keep an innocent child out of his rightful home. We are planning to knock down the wall between the guest room and the master's suite to make a proper nursery. Liam already drew up the blueprints. They had already drawn up blueprints for my house. They were openly discussing tearing down the walls of the home I had built, the sanctuary Marcus and I had shared, and they were doing it in front of my entire community to force my hand. Liam stood tall, radiating an unearned confidence, certain that his aggressive negotiation tactics would force the fragile, grieving widow into submission. He thought his aggressive posture would confuse me. He thought I would crumble under the public pressure and the shame of my late husband's supposed infidelity. I looked at the forged will, then at Liam and Chloe. My mind raced through the documents sitting safely in my home safe. The medical files from 5 years ago detailing the severe infection Marcus had suffered. The files confirming his emergency vasectomy and absolute permanent sterility. And more importantly, the limited liability company documents proving that I was the sole owner of the property and that Marcus had never once been on the deed. But I knew if I revealed my cards right now, they would simply backtrack. They would claim it was a misunderstanding and slink away to devise a new scheme. I needed them to commit to their fraud. I needed them to put their deception on the legal record. I needed them to dig a hole so deep they would never be able to climb out of it. I picked up my phone from the table. I opened the camera application and deliberately took a clear, high-resolution photo of the forged document lying in front of me. I made sure the camera shutter sound was loud enough for Liam to hear. "What are you doing?" Liam snapped, his patronizing smile faltering for a split second. I slid my phone back into my purse and stood up, smoothing the front of my black dress. I met Liam's gaze with a cold, steady stare that made him instinctively take a half step back. "If you are taking over as the property manager, Liam," I said, my voice projecting clearly across the patio, "then you should know I do not sign anything without my lawyer's review. Have your legal team send the original copy of that document to my attorney on Monday morning. Once my legal team verifies the authenticity of my late husband's signature, we can discuss the title transfer." Liam recovered quickly, puffing his chest back out. "Fine. I will have my lawyer send the paperwork, but do not try to drag this out in court, Maya. You do not have the funds to fight a drawn-out legal battle against my firm." I picked up my purse and looked at Chloe, who was still clutching her tissue. "Bring your lawyer," I said simply. I turned my back on the golden couple of the church and walked toward the exit, feeling the burning stares of 50 guests on my back. I had only made it halfway across the manicured lawn toward the parking lot when a sharp hand clamped down on my wrist. The manicured nails dug painfully into my skin. I did not have to turn around to know it was my mother. Eleanor Washington never ran, but she had practically sprinted to intercept me before I could reach my car. My father, Pastor Thomas, followed closely behind her, his heavy footsteps crunching on the gravel path. They maneuvered me into the shadow of a large oak tree, out of direct earshot of the patio guests, but still visible enough to maintain their poised church leadership facade. "Maya, what on earth are you doing?" My mother hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. She tightened her grip on my arm. Her perfectly painted lips stretched into a rigid smile for anyone who might be watching. "You are making a scene. You are embarrassing this family." I looked down at her hand, digging into my flesh, and then up into her eyes. "I am making a scene," I asked, keeping my voice dangerously low. "Your golden child just announced to 50 people that she slept with my dead husband and forged a legal document to steal my property. But I am the one embarrassing the family." My mother scoffed, waving away my words like annoying insects. "Do not use that tone with me, young lady. Chloe is a mother now, and she is vulnerable. You know how fragile she has been since the baby was born. She made a mistake with Marcus, yes, but we are a Christian family and we forgive. We do not drag our dirty laundry through the court system for the whole congregation to see." She let go of my wrist, only to smooth the lapels of my black morning dress, a gesture so condescending it made my stomach turn. You have a good job, Maya. You make a handsome salary at that corporate firm of yours. You do not need a $900,000 house all to yourself. It is far too much empty space for a single widow. Chloe and Liam have a growing family. They really need that house. Liam is a respected businessman, and it looks terrible for him to rent an apartment while you hoard a mansion. Just sign the equity transfer paperwork. We can easily keep this quiet. We can tell the church that you generously donated the property to your nephew. It will protect Chloe's reputation completely. I stared at the woman who gave birth to me, completely bewildered by her twisted logic. She was asking me to reward my sister's supposed affair with my late husband by gifting her a multi-million-dollar real estate asset just to preserve the family image. Before I could respond, my father stepped forward. He used his height to tower over me, a tactic he had employed since I was a little girl. Maya, listen to your mother, he commanded using his deep, resonant pulpit voice. The Lord tests us in mysterious ways. This is your test of charity and forgiveness. Marcus sinned, but he tried to make it right in the end with that will. You must honor his final wishes. Fighting this will only bring shame to my ministry. Liam comes from a very prominent white family in this city. If you drag his name through the mud with a nasty legal battle, his parents will ruin us. They fund half of our community outreach programs. You must consider the greater good. Do not be selfish. A good Christian woman puts her family first. You will hand over the keys and you will do it with grace. The sheer weight of their betrayal settled over my shoulders, but it did not crush me. Instead, it clarified everything perfectly. For 34 years, I had exhausted myself trying to earn the love they freely showered upon Chloe. I had played the responsible daughter and kept quiet to maintain their flawless image. Here they were actively conspiring to strip me of my sanctuary to appease a deceitful sister and a mediocre son-in-law. They did not care about Marcus. They did not care about my grief. They only cared about the country club gossip and the church donation plates. They were perfectly willing to throw me to the wolves to keep their comfortable lives intact. I took a slow, deliberate step back, breaking the physical proximity they were trying to use against me. I looked at my father, the supposed moral compass of our community, and then at my mother, the architect of my childhood trauma. You want to talk about the greater good, I said, my voice steady and cold as ice. You want to talk about protecting reputations. Let me make something very clear to both of you right now. That will is a complete fraud. Marcus never signed it. If Chloe and Liam submit that piece of garbage to a judge, they will be committing a federal offense. And when they do, I will not protect them. I will not protect you. I will let the justice system tear this perfect family image to shreds. My mother's eyes widened in a state of genuine panic. Maya, you would not dare, she finally gasped. You would not send your own sister to jail. I pulled my car keys from my purse, the metal clinking sharply in the quiet afternoon air. I am not sending anyone anywhere, I replied, unlocking my car door. They are marching there all by themselves. And you two are rolling out the red carpet for them. Tell your golden child to hire a very good defense attorney. She is going to need it. I got into my car, locked the doors, and started the engine. I did not look back as I drove away, leaving the pastor and his wife standing in the dust of the parking lot, their perfect facade finally beginning to crack. The sanctuary of my home greeted me with the kind of profound silence that only comes after surviving a war zone. I spent the remainder of Sunday evening completely disconnected from the outside world. I turned off my phone, disabled my notifications, and poured myself a generous glass of red wine. I sat in my expansive living room, letting the quiet wash over me. The leather armchair where Marcus used to read his veterinary journals felt cold, but the space was entirely mine. I slept soundly for the first time since the funeral. My mind was sharp and my strategy was firmly in place. However, I severely underestimated the sheer speed and ferocity of my sister's desperation. Monday morning arrived with a violent vibration against my nightstand. It was barely 6 in the morning, but my phone screen was a blinding cascade of alerts. There were 74 unread text messages and over 100 new notifications from various social media platforms. My email inbox was equally flooded. I picked up the device, my corporate risk management instincts immediately kicking in. A sudden spike in communication meant a crisis had breached containment. I unlocked the screen and opened the first message from a woman named Sarah, who sang in my parents' church choir. The message read, "How can you be so incredibly heartless? Your own blood. Marcus would be absolutely disgusted with you." I swiped to the next message from an elder on the church board. "Sister Maya, we are praying for your soul. Greed is a deadly sin. Please do the right thing for that innocent child." I did not panic. I simply opened Facebook to find the source of the sudden outrage. It did not take long. Pinned to the top of the Atlanta First Fellowship community page with hundreds of shares and thousands of outraged reactions was a monolithic post from Chloe. She had uploaded a heavily filtered black and white photograph of herself holding her baby boy, looking exhausted and appropriately tearful. The caption was a masterclass in emotional manipulation and digital assassination. It began with a Bible verse about forgiveness and sacrifice, before plunging directly into a carefully crafted fiction. Chloe wrote eloquently about her deepest shame and her greatest blessing. She confessed to a moment of weakness with her beloved late brother-in-law Marcus. She described him as a tortured soul seeking comfort and claimed their connection resulted in her beautiful baby boy. She painted a picture of a man desperate to provide for his hidden legacy, secretly drafting a will to ensure his only son would never be homeless. Then she turned her crosshairs directly on me. Chloe wrote that she approached me with a humble heart, seeking only to honor Marcus and his dying wish. She claimed I reacted with violent, terrifying rage. According to her fabricated story, I screamed at her, threatened to ruin her life, and coldly stated I would rather see an infant starve on the street than share a single dime of my massive wealth. She painted me as a bitter, greedy widow hoarding a $900,000 mansion all to myself, while the rightful heir to the property faced imminent homelessness. Her husband Liam was notably absent from her narrative. She positioned herself as a vulnerable mother fighting a ruthless corporate giant. The post ended with a plea for prayer stating she did not want to drag her family through court, but I was leaving her absolutely no choice. She asked the community to pray for my hardened heart. The comments section was an absolute bloodbath. People I had known since childhood, individuals who had eaten dinner at my table and attended my wedding, were publicly calling for my excommunication from the church. They branded me a monster, a gold digger, and a disgrace to the community. They praised Chloe for her bravery in coming forward with her truth and pledged their unwavering support for her and the baby. My parents had even liked the post, their silent digital endorsement lending absolute credibility to Chloe's vicious lies. A weaker person might have crumbled under the weight of such a coordinated public attack. But I was not weak, and I was certainly not a victim. I was a professional who specialized in mitigating catastrophic corporate risks and analyzing hostile takeovers. Chloe thought she was applying pressure. She thought public shaming would force me into a panicked surrender. Instead, she was handing me a loaded weapon on a silver platter. Every single word in that post was actionable defamation. She was publicly accusing me of attempting to leave a child homeless and publishing a fabricated legal claim regarding my property. I did not shed a single tear. I walked into my home office, powered up my desktop computer, and opened a secure digital archiving software. I systematically captured high-resolution screenshots of Chloe's original post. I archived the URL. I took screenshots of every single comment, especially the ones from prominent church members and local business owners who were actively participating in the smear campaign. I documented the timestamps, the share counts, and my parents' digital interactions with the defamatory content. I created a neatly organized digital folder named Defamation Evidence and uploaded it directly to my secure cloud server. Then I drafted a highly professional email to my attorney attaching the entire archive. I instructed her to begin drafting a cease and desist order, but explicitly told her to hold it until I gave the signal. I wanted Chloe to feel completely comfortable in her false victory. I wanted her to keep talking and keep digging her grave deeper. My phone continued to buzz relentlessly with incoming hate mail. I calmly opened my settings and disabled all notifications from social media applications. I blocked the numbers of the most aggressive church members. I was not going to let their coordinated harassment campaign disrupt my own morning peace. Their anger meant absolutely nothing to my ultimate strategy. My peace was abruptly shattered by a heavy pounding on my front door. The chime of the security system echoed through the quiet house, followed by the distinct sound of someone twisting the front doorknob trying to force their way inside. I walked calmly to the foyer and checked the security monitor mounted on the wall. Standing on my porch was a bizarre search party. My mother, Eleanor, stood at the front clutching her designer handbag with a look of severe, righteous indignation. Behind her, Chloe bounced her baby on her hip, looking perfectly styled for a morning of playing the victim. Flanking them was Liam, wearing an overly tight gray suit and holding a leather briefcase. Beside Liam stood an unfamiliar older man in a cheap, ill-fitting brown suit, clutching a manila folder. I pressed the intercom button. "How can I help you today? Open this door immediately, Maya." My mother snapped loudly into the camera. "We are not playing games with you today." I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the heavy oak door open. Liam shoved his way past me as he marched directly into my foyer. Chloe and my mother followed right on his heels, bringing the strange man with them. None of them had been invited inside. "You really brought this on yourself, Maya," my mother scolded, stepping onto my hardwood floors without removing her shoes. "If you had just handled this quietly yesterday, Chloe would not have been forced to share her painful truth with the entire congregation. You left her no choice but to seek public support. I simply watched them invade my sanctuary." Liam did not waste a single second. He dropped his briefcase on my entryway table and immediately pulled a laser measuring tape from his pocket. He marched straight into my sunken living room, pointing the red laser dot at the walls and calculating the square footage. "This load-bearing wall has to go," Liam announced. He pointed toward the partition separating the living room from the dining area. "We need an open-concept layout for the baby. If we knock this down and extend the hardwood, we can put a playpen right here in the center. The natural light from those bay windows is perfect for a toddler." Chloe trailed behind him, running her hands over my sofa. "I was thinking we should repaint these walls green," she mused aloud. "Black and white is just too depressing for a growing family. It feels like a mausoleum in here. We need something bright and cheerful for Marcus's son." "You are trespassing," I stated, my voice perfectly level. Liam scoffed and turned to face me, placing his hands on his hips. "We are inspecting the property, Maya. It is standard procedure before a title transfer. Which brings us to why we are here." He gestured to the nervous-looking man in the brown suit who had been hovering awkwardly by the front door. "This is Mr. Sterling. He is a premier real estate attorney who works exclusively with my brokerage firm. We brought him here to facilitate the transition smoothly." Mr. Sterling stepped forward, sweating profusely. He fumbled with his manila folder and pulled out a stack of papers. "Miss Washington," he began, his voice cracking slightly. "We have prepared a quitclaim deed and an equity transfer agreement. Given the existence of the will your sister presented, we are offering you an out-of-court settlement. If you sign these documents today, relinquishing 50% of the property rights, we will agree not to pursue retroactive rent for the time you have occupied the home since your husband's passing." The sheer audacity of the demand was staggering. They were not just trying to steal half of my house. They were trying to convince me that I owed them money for living in my own home. I looked closely at Mr. Sterling. I noticed the cheap fabric of his suit and the scuffed toes of his dress shoes, details a successful professional would never overlook. He did not carry himself like a premier real estate attorney. He carried himself like a man who was being paid a few $100 under the table to impersonate a lawyer and intimidate a grieving widow. Liam stepped into my personal space, trying to use his height to dominate me. Listen to me very carefully, Maya, he sneered. This is your absolute last chance to do this the easy way. The whole church is against you. The community knows what you are trying to do. If you force us to take this to probate court, I will personally make sure you are drained of every single penny you have. You will be paying my legal fees. You will be paying Chloe's legal fees. You will be bankrupted. Just sign the papers and you can stay in the master bedroom until you find a suitable apartment. My mother nodded in agreement, stepping up beside Liam. He is being more than generous, Maya. You should thank him on your knees for handling this mess. You have brought enough shame to this family. Sign the papers and let your sister finally have some peace. I looked around my beautiful home. I looked at Liam measuring my walls. I looked at Chloe planning her new paint colors. I looked at the fake lawyer sweating onto his fraudulent documents. They were convinced they had backed me into a corner. They thought the social media shame and the morning ambush would cause me to break down crying and sign away my life savings just to make the pressure stop. They were salivating at the thought of stealing my $900,000 asset. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I simply crossed my arms over my chest and smiled a slow, chilling smile that caused the fake lawyer to recoil. I let the silence stretch out, making them sweat under the pressure of my complete lack of compliance. I let the chilling smile fade completely from my face. I deliberately dropped my arms down to my sides, allowing my shoulders to sag forward in defeat. I looked down at the floor and started blinking rapidly. It was time to give them the exact performance they had come here to see. You win, I finally whispered to them, my voice trembling with perfectly manufactured exhaustion. Liam exchanged a victorious glance with my mother. Chloe sighed in relief, stepping closer. I simply cannot fight this anymore, I whispered. The public shaming is too much. I am completely and utterly exhausted. I just lost Marcus, my husband. If this is what it takes to finally get peace and stop the harassment, then fine. You can just have the house. My mother relaxed into a triumphant stance. I knew you would see reason, Maya, she said. We are not doing this to hurt you. We are doing this to heal the family. Someday you will thank us. I nodded meekly to hide my disgust. But I cannot sign these papers today, I said. Liam took a threatening step toward me. We are not playing games, Maya. You said you surrender, so sign the deed right now. I shrank back, acting intimidated. I will sign, I promised, my voice shaking. But you must understand my position, Liam. All of my late husband's assets are currently tied up in probate with my legal team. Signing a random quitclaim deed today will flag the estate and freeze the accounts. It could tie up the house for years. The fake lawyer nodded nervously. She is right, Liam, he mumbled. Probate judges get suspicious about sudden transfers. It could trigger an automatic audit. Liam glared at his hired actor, clearly furious about the interruption, but he recognized the logic. He needed the transfer to look legitimate. So what is your proposed solution? Maya, Liam demanded, crossing his arms tightly across his chest. I looked up at him. I just need you to send the original will to my attorney, the one Chloe showed everyone at the party with Marcus's signature. If you send that original document directly to my legal team, they can process it through the proper channels. They will draw up the official title transfer, linking it directly to the will. That way, it is an airtight legal inheritance. I will tell my lawyer not to fight it. I will tell them to process the transfer of 50% equity to Chloe immediately. Chloe smiled brightly, completely oblivious to the massive trap I had just laid at her feet. That makes perfect sense, Liam, she chirped happily. If her lawyer processes it, then it is totally official, and we do not have to pay the transfer taxes. Let us just send them the will. Liam narrowed his eyes, studying my face for any sign of deception. He was arrogant, but he possessed the kind of cunning that kept him afloat in his shady business dealings. You will instruct your lawyer to accept the will without contesting it, he asked suspiciously. I promise, I whispered, letting a single tear slip down my cheek. I just want the people at the church to stop hating me right now. I want all the hateful and disgusting messages to stop. Just send the document formally to my attorney and the house is yours. Liam finally smiled a greasy, self-satisfied grin. He turned to Mr. Sterling and snatched the manila folder from his sweaty hands. Fine. Give me your lawyer's direct contact information right now. I will personally email the scanned copy today and courier the original physical document to their office by tomorrow morning. I walked over to the entryway table, retrieved a sleek business card from my drawer, and handed it to Liam. He snatched it from my fingers, slipping it into his suit pocket, with a look of absolute triumph. My mother sighed happily, gathering her designer purse and turning toward the front door. I am glad we could resolve this like sensible adults, my mother said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. I will call the church elders and let them know you have chosen to do the Christian thing. We can start fresh, Maya. Liam did not even bother to say goodbye. He simply walked past me, pointing his laser measure at my kitchen archway one last time. We are going to need a good contractor for that wall, he muttered to Chloe as they marched out my front door. The fake lawyer scurried out behind them, eager to escape the tension of the house. I stood in the doorway and watched them pile into Liam's leased luxury sedan. I waited until the car disappeared down the street before I closed the heavy oak door and locked the deadbolt securely. The moment the lock clicked, the defeated widow vanished. I leaned against the door and let out a genuine sharp laugh. They had taken the bait hook, line, and sinker. By agreeing to email and courier that forged will to a licensed attorney for the express purpose of executing a real estate transfer, they had just elevated a pathetic family lie into a severe federal crime. Sending a fraudulent legal document across digital networks constituted wire fraud. Using a courier service to deliver that same forged document across state lines constituted mail fraud. Attempting to use that document to seize a multi-million-dollar asset constituted grand larceny and real estate fraud. They thought they had won, but they had just handed me the very evidence I needed to destroy them entirely. I walked back into my home office and picked up my phone. I dialed my attorney's private number, feeling a massive surge of adrenaline that cleared away the remaining fog of my grief. The game was no longer about defending my home from a greedy sister and her arrogant husband. It was about orchestrating their complete and total destruction, using their own blinding arrogance against them. Evelyn answered on the second ring. I quickly briefed her on the morning invasion, the fake lawyer, and the agreement I had just made with my brother-in-law. I heard the sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line, followed by a low, appreciative chuckle. Evelyn was a senior partner at a ruthless downtown litigation firm, and she did not suffer fools. She immediately understood the magnitude of the trap I had set. Maya, she said, her voice thick with anticipation, if he actually transmits that document to my office, claiming it to be a legal instrument for transferring real estate equity, he is committing multiple felonies. I told her to expect the email by the end of the day and the physical courier by tomorrow morning. I also gave her one additional directive. I needed a full, comprehensive background check on Liam. Everything from his credit score to his current brokerage transactions. I needed to know exactly what was motivating this sudden, aggressive push for my property. The rest of the day crawled by in a tense quiet. I ignored the continuing barrage of hateful social media notifications and church group emails. They were just white noise now. Tuesday morning arrived crisp and clear. At precisely 9:30, my phone screen lit up with an encrypted email from Evelyn's office. The subject line read simply, "Document verification and background report." I opened the attachment, feeling the steady thump of my heart against my ribs. The first section of the report detailed the forensic analysis of the will Liam had so proudly couriered to a premier law firm. It was an absolute joke. Evelyn broke down the forgery with surgical precision. The document was printed on standard copy paper downloaded from a free legal template website. The notary seal stamped at the bottom was entirely fictitious, belonging to a registered notary who had passed away 3 years prior. The witnesses listed on the document did not exist in the state registry, but the most damning piece of evidence was the signature itself. Evelyn had cross-referenced the signature on the fake will with Marcus's actual verified signatures from our mortgage documents and his veterinary license renewals. The loops were wrong, the pressure points were inconsistent, and the baseline angle was completely skewed. Someone had clearly traced a low-resolution image of his signature and filled it in with a cheap ballpoint pen. It would not hold up to even 5 seconds of scrutiny in a legitimate probate court. By submitting it through the postal service to a licensed attorney, Liam had officially committed mail fraud and attempted grand larceny. But Evelyn's email did not stop there. The second half of the document contained the private investigator's deep dive into Liam's financial history, and this was where the true masterpiece of his desperation was finally revealed. I scrolled down the page, my eyes widening, as the facade of the successful white-collar real estate broker completely disintegrated before my eyes. Liam was not just in debt, he was drowning in a catastrophic financial sinkhole. The expensive country club memberships, the leased luxury sedan, the custom-tailored suits were all financed by a mountain of maxed-out credit cards and high-interest personal loans. His credit score was abysmal. He was 3 months behind on his own rent. But consumer debt was the least of his problems. The investigator had pulled public records and tapped into industry networks, uncovering a massive ticking time bomb hanging directly over Liam's head. For the past 18 months, Liam had been secretly embezzling money from the escrow accounts at his real estate brokerage firm. He had been skimming client deposits to fund his lavish lifestyle and keep up the appearance of wealth for his affluent friends and my status-obsessed parents. The brokerage had recently initiated an internal audit. They had discovered the missing funds entirely totaling nearly $400,000. According to Evelyn's investigator, the firm was preparing to hand their findings over to the authorities by the end of the month. Liam was facing imminent indictment disbarment and a lengthy sentence in federal prison. I sat back in my chair, letting the sheer magnitude of this revelation wash over me. Everything suddenly made perfect sense. The highly aggressive timeline, the desperation to avoid a legitimate probate court, the fake lawyer he had brought into my living room. Liam did not care about honoring Marcuse's final wishes. He certainly did not care about securing a permanent home for Chloe and the baby. Liam was a desperate, cornered animal. He needed a massive infusion of cash immediately to pay back the embezzled escrow funds before his brokerage firm filed formal criminal charges. He looked at my $900,000 house and saw a life raft. If he could force me to sign over half the equity, he could immediately borrow against it or force a quick sale. He was using his wife, his supposed child, and my dead husband to save his own skin from a federal prison cell. The absolute depravity of his scheme was breathtaking. He had weaponized my heavy grief and my sister's long-standing jealousy to orchestrate a multi-million-dollar heist. He had easily convinced my socially anxious parents to support a vicious smear campaign against their own daughter, all so he could avoid wearing a bright orange jumpsuit. He thought his aggressive posturing and his race would naturally intimidate the grieving Black Widow into handing over the keys to her castle. He truly believed he was the smartest person in the room. I printed the entire legal report, holding the warm pages firmly in my hands. The paper trail was absolute perfection. Liam was not just walking into a trap. He had eagerly strapped himself to a rocket aimed straight at a solid brick wall. I placed the documents carefully into a thick manila folder and locked it securely in my desk drawer. I did not need to scream or cry or defend myself on the internet. I had the devastating truth locked in a safe, and I was going to use it to obliterate his entire existence. I picked up my phone to call the one person who could provide the final nail in the coffin. It was time to secure the biological evidence, and I knew exactly how to get it. I hung up the phone with Evelyn and leaned back in my leather office chair. The trap was set. The legal snare was tightening around Liam and Chloe with every passing hour. Before I could even begin planning my next move to secure the DNA evidence, my phone vibrated across the mahogany desk. It was an incoming call from the main office of Atlanta First Fellowship. My father did not dial his own calls. He had an administrative assistant do it to establish his dominance and importance. I answered the call and was immediately instructed that Pastor Thomas required my presence in his private study at the church. I could have declined. I could have stayed in the comfort of my secure home. But a cold, calculated curiosity washed over me. I wanted to look the man who raised me directly in the eye and see exactly how far he was willing to go to protect a fraud. I drove to the sprawling campus of Atlanta First Fellowship. The church was a massive architectural marvel of glass and steel, heavily funded by the deep pockets of its affluent congregation. My father had built an empire on the concepts of grace and charity, yet his own heart was a fortress of vanity. I walked through the vaulted lobby, ignoring the hushed whispers from the administrative staff who had undoubtedly read Chloe's vicious social media post. I marched straight down the plush-carpeted hallway and opened the heavy double doors to my father's private office. The room was designed exclusively to intimidate. The mahogany desk was the size of a small boat, flanked by towering bookshelves and framed photographs of my father shaking hands with local politicians. Pastor Thomas sat behind his desk, wearing a pristine charcoal suit. He did not stand to greet me. He simply steepled his fingers together and gestured for me to sit in one of the low leather guest chairs. I remained standing. Maya, he began, his voice dripping with that smooth, practiced cadence he used for Sunday sermons. I am glad you came. We need to heal this family. The hostility you showed your mother and me yesterday in the parking lot was deeply troubling. I have spent the entire night in prayer seeking guidance for your hardened heart. I stared at him, refusing to take the bait. He sighed heavily, placing a leather-bound Bible on his desk. Marcus was a good man, Maya, but all men fall short of the glory. He made a tragic mistake with your sister, but he tried to rectify it before the Lord called him home. You are standing in the way of his redemption by clinging to material possessions. You are letting pride cloud your judgment. He leaned forward, abandoning the pastoral tone for something much sharper and far more calculating. Let us speak practically. You are a single black woman with a demanding corporate job. You do not have the time or the social capital to maintain a property of that magnitude in that specific neighborhood. Liam does. Liam comes from a highly respected family. His father sits on the city planning council. His mother organizes our largest annual charity gala. Liam is a prominent white businessman whose reputation brings significant prestige to our family and to this church. We cannot afford a public scandal that makes him look like a victim of a greedy sister-in-law. I listened in stunned silence as my own father openly prioritized a mediocre son-in-law over his grieving daughter simply because of race, social connections, and church donations. My father continued laying out his twisted justification without an ounce of shame. If you force Chloe and Liam to take you to court, they will use every resource at their disposal. The community will side with the young mother and the established real estate broker. You will be cast out of this church, Maya. Your professional reputation will suffer when people believe you tried to leave an infant homeless. Sign the transfer deed today. Liam has assured me he will find you a nice, modest townhome closer to your downtown office. It is the Christian thing to do. The absolute moral bankruptcy radiating from behind that desk was staggering. My father was willing to sacrifice my livelihood, my sanctuary, and my late husband's memory on the altar of his own social standing. He was terrified of losing the financial backing of Liam's wealthy parents. He was terrified of the church gossip. He viewed me as nothing more than a sacrificial lamb meant to be slaughtered to keep his perfect pastoral image intact. I looked around the lavish office, noting the expensive artwork and the designer furniture paid for by the congregation. You are asking me to sign away my home to a man who mocks me in my own living room, I asked, keeping my voice perfectly level. You are asking me to reward a sister who publicly assassinates my character. You want me to do this so you can keep collecting donation checks from Liam's country club friends. Pastor Thomas slammed his hand flat against the desktop. Do not speak to me with that insolence. I am your father, and I am your spiritual leader. You will show respect. You are tearing this family apart over greed. Chloe needs that house to raise her son properly. Liam needs the stability of a substantial asset to advance his brokerage firm. You are standing in the way of their future out of pure spite because your own marriage failed to produce a child. He had aimed straight for the deepest wound, utilizing my painful struggles with infertility as a weapon to secure real estate for his favorite daughter. He expected me to shatter right there in his office. He expected the tears to fall and the absolute submission to follow. Instead, I felt nothing but a cold, razor-sharp clarity. I leaned over his massive desk, bracing my hands on the polished wood, bringing my face inches from his. My marriage did not fail, I stated, my voice deadly quiet. My husband loved me with his entire soul until his very last breath. He would be absolutely disgusted by the cowardly man sitting in this chair right now. You can keep your prayers, Pastor Thomas. You are going to need every single one of them when the truth comes for this family. I stood up, tall, turned my back on the man who was no longer my father, and walked out of the church office. The first phase of their destruction was locked into place. Now it was time to meet Liam face to face and secure the final piece of biological evidence that would obliterate their entire existence. The text message from Liam had arrived while I was pulling out of the church parking lot. He demanded we meet at an upscale espresso bar downtown, a place with marble countertops and $12 lattes that perfectly matched his pretentious manufactured aesthetic. I parked my car and walked inside, immediately spotting him sitting in a leather booth near the back. He wore a crisp, tailored suit and was aggressively tapping his expensive-looking watch. He did not stand when I approached the table. He simply slid a manila folder across the polished marble surface before I even had the chance to sit down. "We are done playing these little games," Maya Liam stated, his voice entirely devoid of the fake Southern charm he used around my parents. I sat down across from him, keeping my posture perfectly straight. "You requested this meeting, Liam," I replied calmly. "I assumed you wanted to discuss the timeline for the property transfer." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table and lacing his fingers together. "The timeline is right now. You are going to take this pen and you are going to sign the deed transfer today. No more stalling. No more waiting for your imaginary legal team to verify anything. You are going to sign it, and then you are going to disappear from our lives." I looked at the folder but did not touch it, and if I refuse, I asked, matching his steady gaze, "What exactly is your backup plan?" Liam let out a harsh, humorless laugh. He leaned back in the booth, spreading his arms out wide to demonstrate his supreme confidence. "My backup plan is destroying you. You think you are so smart with your corporate job and your fancy house, but you are forgetting how the real world actually works. Let me break it down for you in terms even you can understand. I am a wealthy, connected white man in the real estate industry. My family plays golf with judges and city council members. You are a single black widow who is currently being publicly crucified by her own church and her own parents." He leaned back forward, dropping his voice to a menacing whisper. "Who do you honestly think the legal system is going to believe? If you drag this into a courtroom, I will tell the judge you are having a mental breakdown from grief. I will have my lawyers bury you in so much paperwork and so many injunctions that you will not be able to afford groceries, let alone a defense attorney. I will paint you as a bitter, jealous woman trying to steal from an innocent child. The police, the courts, the community, they are always going to side with me. They are naturally conditioned to believe a man who looks like me over a woman who looks like you. You do not have the power to win this fight, Maya. You are completely outmatched." The espresso machine hissed loudly in the background, masking the sheer villainy of his words from the other patrons. To the outside world, we probably looked like two colleagues discussing a mundane business contract. Nobody could hear the venom dripping from his tongue. His blatant racism and staggering arrogance hung in the air between us, heavy and suffocating. He was openly admitting that he planned to weaponize systemic bias to steal my property. A lesser woman would have flipped the table or thrown her scorching hot coffee directly into his smug face. But I was not a lesser woman. I was a strategist executing a flawless demolition. I needed him to feel absolutely invincible. I needed his ego inflated to maximum capacity so he would not notice the trap snapping shut around his ankles. "Do not test my patience, Maya," he continued, his blue eyes entirely devoid of empathy. "You saw what happened to your reputation in just 24 hours. Chloe posted one story, and your entire support system abandoned you. Your own father just handed you over to me. You have absolutely no one left in your corner. If you do not sign this right now, I will make sure you lose your job too. I know people at your corporate firm. One phone call from me about your unstable behavior and you will be packing your desk by Friday. You will be unemployed, homeless, and completely disgraced. I let my hands shake visibly as I picked up the pen he had placed beside the folder. I held it suspended over the signature line hovering just above the paper. Liam leaned in closer, his breathing shallow with anticipation. He was practically vibrating with greed. The house was seconds away from being his, or so he thought. He leaned forward so much that the front of his tailored suit jacket brushed against the marble table. I slowly set the pen back down on the table, pushing the folder exactly 1 inch back toward him. I cannot sign this without a notary present, I said, my voice soft but firm. It is a real estate transfer, Liam. If I sign this here without an official witness, the county clerk's office will reject the deed transfer immediately. You know that. As a real estate broker, you know a highly contested transfer requires an official seal. If we submit an unnotarized document, it will trigger an automatic fraud investigation. Liam's face flashed with pure, unadulterated rage, but he quickly suppressed it, realizing I was legally correct. He clenched his jaw, his teeth grinding together audibly. He hated that I knew the law. He hated that he could not bully me into an immediate legally binding surrender right there in the coffee shop. Fine, he spat, grabbing the folder and shoving it roughly back into his leather briefcase. We will do this the hard way. I will bring a notary to the church on Sunday morning. You will sign it in front of the entire congregation. You will hand over the property in front of your parents and you will apologize to my wife publicly. He grabbed his coat from the booth aggressively, throwing it over his arm. If you try to back out on Sunday, Maya, I will ruin you, he threatened, standing up and towering over the table. I will take everything you have ever worked for. He turned and stormed out of the coffee shop, leaving me sitting alone in the booth. I watched him walk to his luxury car, his posture rigid with arrogance. I smiled, picking up my coffee cup. He was so consumed by his own grand illusion of power that he completely failed to notice what I had just done. The meeting had given me the exact physical proximity I required, and I had not wasted a single second. The biological evidence I needed to destroy his entire life was now safely in my possession. I remained perfectly still in the leather booth, watching Liam's luxury sedan aggressively pull out of the parking lot and merge into downtown traffic. I did not exhale the breath I had been holding until his car was completely out of sight. I slowly unclenched my left hand, which had been resting out of view beneath the marble table for the entirety of his aggressive rant. My palm was sweating, but resting securely between my index and middle fingers was the prize I had risked everything to acquire. 3 distinct dark brown hairs plucked cleanly from the shoulder of Liam's tailored wool coat when he had leaned aggressively over the table to threaten me. He had been so consumed by his own monologue of superiority, so focused on intimidating the grieving widow, that he never felt the slight brush of my hand against his expensive fabric. I carefully opened my purse and retrieved a small, sterile plastic evidence bag I had purchased specifically for this encounter. Using a pair of tweezers, I transferred the 3 hairs from my palm into the bag and sealed it tightly. I labeled the bag with a black marker, noting the date, time, and location of the collection. I placed the sealed bag into a secure zippered compartment inside my purse right next to an identical plastic bag. That second bag contained a single soft blonde curl. I had found it clinging to the soft fabric of a baby blue beanie that Chloe had carelessly left behind on my entryway console table during their aggressive home invasion 2 days prior. The baby had been wearing it when they marched into my foyer, and Chloe had pulled it off when he started crying, throwing it onto my table while Liam measured my walls. In her triumphant rush to leave after I feigned surrender, she had forgotten to pick it up. It was a careless mistake, but arrogance breeds carelessness, and my sister had always been incredibly arrogant. I picked up my coffee cup, my hand finally steady. The pieces were falling into place with mathematical precision. Liam thought he was the mastermind orchestrating a hostile takeover of my estate. He believed his threats regarding systemic bias and legal intimidation had broken my spirit. He had no idea he was merely a pawn moving exactly where I needed him to go on a chessboard he could not even see. I finished my coffee, dropped a $20 bill on the table, and walked out of the cafe into the crisp afternoon air. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a cold, calculating focus. My next destination was not my home or my office. I drove directly to the suburban branch of a highly reputable independent medical testing facility. I did not use my usual route, taking side streets to ensure I was not being followed by anyone connected to Liam or my parents' church. The clinic was located in a nondescript professional building offering absolute discretion for high-end clients, requiring expedited testing services. I had scheduled the appointment under a corporate alias, ensuring my name would not appear in any public or easily accessible medical logs. I parked my car and walked into the sterile, brightly lit waiting room. A receptionist with a polite, professional smile directed me to a private consultation room. 10 minutes later, a senior lab technician entered the room. I had worked with him years ago on a corporate risk assessment project, evaluating the security protocols of medical facilities. He owed me a professional favor, and I was cashing it in. I handed him the 2 sterile bags, placing them carefully on the stainless steel counter. "I need a rush order DNA comparison," I stated, keeping my voice strictly professional. "A full paternity analysis comparing sample A to sample B. I need the results authenticated and certified for legal proceedings, and I need it by Friday afternoon." The technician examined the bags, holding them up to the light. "It is highly irregular to process samples collected outside a clinical setting for legal purposes." He noted, his brow furrowing slightly. "Usually we require a documented chain of custody and a court order to guarantee the samples were not tampered with." "I am not submitting this to a judge," I replied, leaning forward slightly. "I am submitting this to a very public, very angry congregation. I just need to know the absolute scientific truth before I destroy a man's life." "Can you run the analysis, or do I need to find another facility?" He looked at me, assessing the unwavering determination in my eyes. He nodded slowly, slipping the bags into a secure folder. "I can run the analysis," he confirmed. "The scientific results will be 100% accurate. However, without a formal chain of custody, the document will clearly state the samples were self-provided. I can guarantee the science, but I cannot guarantee a court will accept the collection method." "That is perfectly fine," I assured him. "I do not need a court to accept it. I just need the man who provided sample A to read the results. The truth will do the rest of the heavy lifting." I paid the exorbitant fee for expedited processing, using a cashier's check to leave no digital footprint. I left the clinic feeling a profound sense of satisfaction. The trap was fully constructed, the bait was taken, and the final piece of explosive evidence was currently incubating in a sterile laboratory. All that remained was the waiting and the execution. I spent the next 3 days in near total isolation. My phone remained silent, blocking the ongoing barrage of notifications from Chloe's supporters. I did not answer the aggressive text messages from Liam demanding to know if I was ready for Sunday's public surrender. I did not respond to my mother's voicemails, alternately pleading and demanding my compliance. I focused entirely on preparing my presentation for Sunday. I organized the digital files Evelyn had sent, the forensic report on the forged will, the detailed background investigation revealing Liam's imminent indictment for embezzlement, and the official LLC documents proving Marcus had never owned a single brick of my home. I compiled them into a clean, sequential presentation, loading the files onto a secure, encrypted flash drive. I also prepared a physical dossier, printing crisp, high-quality copies of every single document. I arranged them in a black leather binder, inserting tabbed dividers for easy reference during the chaos I knew was coming. I reviewed Marcus's medical records, running my fingers over the official Johns Hopkins letterhead, confirming his permanent sterility. The grief of losing him still echoed in my chest, but it was now overshadowed by a fierce, protective anger. They had tried to use his memory as a weapon to steal my sanctuary. They had dragged his name through the mud, accusing him of a sordid affair to justify their greed. I was not just defending my property. I was defending the honor of the only man who had ever truly loved me. Friday afternoon arrived, bringing a heavy rainstorm that washed the Atlanta streets clean. I sat in my home office watching the rain streak the windows when my phone finally vibrated with an encrypted email notification. The sender was the medical testing facility. The subject line read simply, "Analysis results." I clicked the attachment, holding my breath as the secure PDF document loaded onto my screen. I scrolled past the technical jargon and the scientific methodologies, scanning directly to the final conclusive paragraph. The words jumped off the screen, confirming what I had suspected, confirming what would absolutely annihilate the golden couple of Atlanta First Fellowship. I smiled, saving the document to my flash drive and printing a pristine copy for my leather binder. The truth was far more devastating than I could have ever imagined. Sunday morning was going to be spectacular. The encrypted file downloaded with a satisfying ping. I opened the PDF, my eyes immediately seeking the final conclusion at the bottom of the page. The words 0.0% probability of paternity stared back at me, stark and undeniable. Liam was not the father. Marcus was not the father. Chloe's perfect golden child belonged to a man neither of them had named. I let out a sharp, genuine laugh, the sound echoing in my quiet office. The golden couple was a complete fraud. I printed 2 copies of the DNA results on thick, high-quality paper, placing one securely in my leather binder and locking the other in the fireproof safe hidden behind my bookshelf. This binder was no longer just a collection of documents. It was a weapon of mass destruction. I flipped through the tabs, reviewing my arsenal. Tab 1, the forensic report from Evelyn's office, meticulously destroying the forged will complete with the fake notary seal and traced signature. It clearly outlined the federal offenses of mail and wire fraud. Tab 2, the private investigator's background check on Liam, exposing his mountain of debt, the leased luxury car, the maxed-out credit cards, and the imminent indictment for embezzling $400,000 from his brokerage firm. Tab 3. The LLC documents proving I was the sole owner of my $900,000 home, establishing that Marcus never had the legal right to bequeath it to anyone. Tab 4. Marcus's medical records from Johns Hopkins, confirming a severe infection 5 years ago that resulted in an emergency vasectomy and absolute sterility. And finally, Tab 5. The DNA results, the absolute proof that Chloe's child was not a product of an affair with my late husband, nor was it the product of her marriage to Liam. I spent Saturday morning organizing the digital files, ensuring everything was perfectly formatted for the projector screens at the church. I practiced my delivery, honing my tone to a razor-sharp edge. I would not yell. I would not cry. I would present the facts with the clinical precision of a corporate strategist dismantling a hostile takeover. The afternoon was spent tying up loose ends. I finalized the transfer of my remaining liquid assets into the secure accounts Evelyn had established, ensuring Liam couldn't access a single dime, even if he tried a desperate last-minute maneuver. I drafted an email to the church elders, scheduling it to send exactly 1 hour before the Sunday service began. The email contained a brief cryptic message. Please ensure all board members are present for a significant family announcement following the sermon. The truth will be revealed. As evening fell, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Liam. Tomorrow at 11 a.m. Don't be late. Bring the signed deed. We're ready. He was so arrogant, so utterly confident in his victory. He thought he had me cornered, completely unaware that he was walking into a trap of his own making. I replied with a single chilling word, understood. I poured myself a glass of Marcus's favorite bourbon and walked out to the balcony, looking out over the city skyline. The pain of his loss still lingered, a dull ache in my chest, but it was now fueled by a fierce, protective fire. They had tried to tarnish his memory, to paint him as an adulterer, to steal the home we built together. They had underestimated me, assuming my grief made me weak, assuming my silence meant surrender. They were about to learn that a quiet storm is often the most destructive. Sunday morning dawned bright and clear, the sun reflecting off the dew-covered grass of my front lawn. I dressed with meticulous care, choosing a tailored navy blue suit that commanded respect, paired with understated jewelry. I wanted to look professional, formidable, and entirely in control. I slipped the encrypted flash drive into my pocket and tucked the leather binder securely under my arm. As I drove toward Atlanta First Fellowship, the familiar route felt completely different. This wasn't a journey to seek comfort or spiritual guidance. It was a march to the executioner's block. I pulled into the sprawling parking lot, noting the array of luxury vehicles belonging to the affluent congregation. Liam's leased sedan was parked near the front, a symbol of his desperate need for status. I walked through the heavy oak doors, the scent of polished wood and expensive perfume filling the air. The sanctuary was already packed, a sea of familiar faces, waiting for the service to begin. I saw my parents sitting in the front row, their posture rigid, projecting an image of serene authority. Chloe and Liam sat nearby, Liam looking smug, Chloe playing the role of the nervous, expectant mother perfectly. I took a seat near the back, my presence unnoticed by the majority of the congregation. I watched as my father delivered his sermon, his booming voice echoing through the vaulted ceiling, preaching about forgiveness, sacrifice, and the importance of family. The hypocrisy was nauseating, but I remained still, my expression unreadable. As the service concluded, Pastor Thomas stepped back to the podium, clearing his throat loudly. The congregation quieted, sensing a shift in the usual routine. Brothers and sisters. He began, his voice thick with practiced emotion. Today we gather not just to worship, but to witness an act of profound grace and reconciliation within our own community. As many of you know, our family has recently faced a tragic loss, followed by a painful revelation. He gestured toward Chloe and Liam, who stood up and moved to the front of the altar. Liam held a manila folder, his chest puffed out with arrogant pride. Chloe stood beside him, clutching a tissue, her eyes downcast. My daughter Chloe has carried a heavy burden, Pastor Thomas continued. But today we choose love. We choose forgiveness. We choose to honor the final wishes of a man who, despite his flaws, sought to provide for his child. He turned his gaze toward the back of the sanctuary, finally acknowledging my presence. Maya, please come forward. The entire congregation turned to look at me. Hundreds of eyes filled with pity, judgment, and morbid curiosity tracked my every movement. I stood up smoothly, adjusting my jacket, and walked down the center aisle. The silence in the church was absolute, the tension crackling in the air. I approached the altar, stopping a few feet away from my parents, Chloe and Liam. Liam thrust the manila folder toward me, a condescending smirk playing on his lips. It's time to do the right thing, Maya, he said loudly, ensuring everyone heard. Sign the deed. Let this family heal. I did not take the folder. I did not look at the deed. I simply smiled, a cold, calculated smile that caused Liam's smirk to falter. I think, I said, my voice projecting clearly without the need for a microphone. We need to look at the evidence first. Section 12, 1,000 words. The murmurs that had begun to ripple through the sanctuary abruptly ceased. The heavy silence that followed was suffocating. Hundreds of people held their collective breath, waiting for my next move. Liam shoved the manila folder closer to my chest, his knuckles turning white from the force of his grip. His eyes darted nervously toward the congregation and then back to me. He was trying to maintain his posture as the benevolent savior of the family, but the slight tremor in his jaw betrayed his rising panic. Sign the papers! Maya, Liam hissed through gritted teeth, keeping his voice low enough that the microphone on the pulpit would not pick it up. Stop making a fool of yourself. Everyone is watching you. You are acting completely unstable. I did not break eye contact. I am acting exactly like a woman who knows her legal rights, I replied smoothly. And since you decided to make this a public spectacle, I think the congregation deserves a public explanation. Pastor Thomas stepped down from the elevated pulpit, his clerical robe sweeping across the polished wood floor. He placed a heavy hand on my shoulder, squeezing hard enough to send a warning pulse of pain down my arm. He forced a wide pastoral smile for the audience. Sister Maya is simply overwhelmed with emotion, Pastor Thomas announced, projecting his voice to fill the cavernous room. The grief of losing Marcus has clouded her judgment. We brought her here today to surround her with the love of our church family. My mother Eleanor hurried over and whispered sharply directly into my ear. You are ruining everything. Sign the deed and we can all go home. If you embarrass your father in front of these people, you will never step foot in this church again. I will make sure you are completely shunned. I looked at the woman who had spent my entire childhood comparing me to the golden child, standing a few feet away. Chloe was clutching her baby, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and confusion. She had expected me to crumble. She had built her entire reality on the assumption that I would always fold under the pressure of my parents' expectations. I stepped back, breaking free from my father's heavy grip and my mother's suffocating proximity. I walked directly to the center microphone stand, positioned just below the main pulpit. I adjusted the height of the microphone with deliberate, calm movements. My father has just told you that I am overwhelmed by grief. I said, my voice echoing clearly through the massive speakers of Atlanta First Fellowship. He is absolutely correct. I am grieving the loss of my husband, Marcus. But my father is incorrect about my judgment. My judgment has never been clearer than it is at this exact moment. For the past week, I have been the target of a vicious, coordinated smear campaign. I continued gripping the edges of the microphone stand. You believed that my sister Chloe had a tragic affair with my husband, resulting in the beautiful baby boy she is holding right now. Chloe let out a dramatic sob, burying her face in the baby's shoulder. Liam stepped in front of her. Turn off her microphone! Liam shouted, waving frantically at the sound booth located at the back of the balcony. She is having a mental breakdown. She needs medical help, not an audience. Turn it off right now. The microphone stayed on. Earlier that morning, I had visited the sound booth and handed a crisp $100 bill to the teenage volunteer running the audio board, along with very specific instructions to ignore anyone except me. I am not having a breakdown, Liam, I said, projecting my voice over his shouting. I am simply bringing the truth into the light. But a church is supposed to be a place of truth. And today, we are going to look at the absolute truth. I reached into the pocket of my tailored navy suit and pulled out the encrypted flash drive. I held it up for the congregation to see the small metal device catching the light from the stained glass windows. My sister brought a piece of paper to a birthday party and called it a will, I announced. She brought a fake lawyer to my living room to force a real estate transfer. She and her husband tried to use the threat of public shame to steal a $900,000 property. They banked on my silence. They banked on my fear. They banked on the systemic bias of a justice system that they believed would favor a white real estate broker over a black widow. Liam lunged forward, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. "Give me that drive, you crazy witch!" he roared, completely dropping his composed gentleman facade. Two off-duty police officers I had spoken to prior to the service quickly stepped out of their pews and moved toward the altar. Their presence made Liam freeze in his tracks. He backed away. "David," I called out, addressing the audio volunteer, "please lower the main projection screens. It is time for the congregation to see exactly what kind of people have been leading them." The mechanical hum of the massive white projector screens descending from the ceiling filled the silent church building. The bright lights in the massive sanctuary automatically dimmed, plunging the altar into dark shadows. The trap was finally and fully sprung, and there was absolutely no escape for any of them. The digital evidence was loaded and ready to completely obliterate their entire miserable existence. I took one final deep breath, standing tall in the dim light. I watched Liam clench his fists, his arrogant posture finally crumbling into genuine terror as the projectors flickered to life, illuminating the stage. The very first digital document was about to expose the ugliest lie they had ever told, tearing apart their fake golden facade piece by piece. The massive screens behind the altar flared with a brilliant white light. A collective hush fell over the sanctuary as the crisp, high-resolution image of a formal medical document materialized above our heads. The bold blue logo of Johns Hopkins Hospital anchored the top of the page. I stepped closer to the microphone, ensuring my voice would carry to the very last row of the balcony. I want everyone to look closely at the screen. I commanded, my tone steady and authoritative. You are looking at the official certified medical records of my late husband, Marcus Washington. These documents were secured directly from his surgical team and released to me as his next of kin. Chloe stared at the screen, her mouth slightly ajar. She blinked rapidly, trying to comprehend the complex medical terminology displayed in bold black text. I could see the exact moment her brain struggled to process the clinical language. She was desperately searching for a loophole, anything she could use to salvage her fabricated narrative. But science does not offer loopholes, and biology does not negotiate with liars. 5 years ago, Marcus faced the most terrifying medical crisis of his entire life. I began projecting my voice to command the attention of every person in the room. As many of you know, Marcus was a highly dedicated veterinarian. He spent his days treating animals, caring for the most vulnerable creatures in our community. What most of you do not know, because Marcus was an incredibly private man, is that he sustained a severe injury while operating on a rescue animal. That minor injury quickly developed into a massive, aggressive internal infection. I let the weight of my words settle over the congregation. I saw church elders nodding slowly, remembering the brief period when Marcus was absent from Sunday services. My mother stood frozen near the front pew, her hands tightly clasped together. She had known Marcus was sick back then, but she never cared enough to ask for the details. She was too busy planning Chloe's lavish engagement party to bother with my husband's hospitalization. The infection spread rapidly through his bloodstream. I continued refusing to let my voice break, despite the painful memories clawing at my chest. He was emergency airlifted to Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore. I sat by his bedside in the intensive care unit for 14 agonizing days, praying he would survive. The surgical team worked around the clock to stop the infection from destroying his vital organs. To save his life, the doctors had to make a drastic, permanent medical decision. I pressed a button on the remote in my hand. The presentation advanced to the next slide, zooming in on a specific highlighted paragraph bearing the signature of the chief of surgery. To eradicate the infection and save Marcus's life, the surgeons were forced to perform a bilateral orchiectomy and a full permanent vasectomy. I stated the clinical terms, slicing through the heavy church air like a scalpel. He lost his reproductive capabilities entirely. He suffered permanent, irreversible sterility. The entire congregation drew a sharp collective breath. A woman in the third row let out a loud gasp, covering her mouth with both hands. The silence that followed was absolute, unbroken by even a single cough. I turned my body completely away from the congregation and faced my sister directly. Chloe was physically shaking now. The fake tears she had planned to use for sympathy were completely gone, replaced by the dry, wide-eyed stare of a trapped animal. She clutched her baby tighter against her chest, stepping backward as if the projection screen behind me might suddenly fall and crush her. "Marcus was 100% sterile, Chloe," I said, my voice dropping to a harsh, resonant register. "He had absolutely zero biological capacity to father a child. He could not have gotten you pregnant. He could not have gotten anyone pregnant. It is scientifically, biologically, and medically impossible for that baby in your arms to be his son." Chloe opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. She looked at Liam, begging him to intervene, to use his loud, booming voice to save her. But Liam was utterly speechless, staring at the glowing medical records with a look of pure, unadulterated horror. His entire fraudulent real estate scheme was evaporating right before his eyes. He had bet everything, his freedom, his financial salvation, his reputation, on the assumption that a dead man could not defend himself against a paternity claim. He had never considered that the dead man's medical history would rise from the grave to testify against them. "You stood in front of this entire community and accused my husband of infidelity." I continued, stepping closer to Chloe and Liam. "You dragged the name of a brilliant, loving man through the mud to justify stealing my property. You posted a disgusting fictional story on the internet painting him as an adulterer and me as a heartless villain." You claimed he felt guilty about a secret affair and drafted a hidden will to protect his illegitimate child. I pointed up at the massive screen behind me. But the science proves you are a liar, Chloe. The science proves that your entire tragic story is an absolute fabrication. Marcus did not have an affair with you because he knew with absolute medical certainty that he could never produce a child. If you had actually slept with him and told him you were pregnant, he would have known instantly that you were lying. He would have known the baby was not his. My father. Pastor Thomas swayed slightly on his feet, grabbing the edge of the wooden pulpit to steady himself. The sheer magnitude of his daughter's deception was crashing down upon him. He had blindly supported her. He had weaponized his pastoral authority to force me into giving up my home, all based on a lie so poorly constructed it fell apart under basic medical scrutiny. The silence in the sanctuary shattered like glass hitting a concrete floor. It started as a low rumble, a wave of shocked whispers rippling through the wooden pews. Then the voices grew louder, overlapping and colliding, until the massive church echoed with pure, unrestrained outrage. The very same people who had flooded my inbox with hate mail just 24 hours ago were now staring at my sister with absolute disgust. Church elders who had prayed for my soul were now shaking their heads at the golden child standing frozen at the altar. I kept my posture rigid, watching the magnificent collapse of my sister's carefully constructed reality. Chloe turned a sickly shade of gray, all the blood rushing away from her face. The heavy layers of designer foundation she wore suddenly looked like a cheap mask peeling away to reveal the terrified fraud underneath. She clutched the baby so tightly against her chest that he began to fuss, letting out sharp, confused cries that pierced through the angry murmurs of the congregation. "There must be some kind of mistake," Chloe stammered, her voice thin and reedy. She looked frantically around the room, begging anyone to throw her a lifeline. The doctors could have been wrong. Miracles happen every single day. People are told they cannot have children, and then God blesses them. Marcus and I experienced a miracle. A harsh laugh erupted from the second row. It was Mrs. Davis, the head of the church finance committee. Nobody was buying the miracle defense. Chloe looked toward our mother, hoping for the fierce protection Eleanor usually provided. But my mother had sunk down onto the wooden pew, pressing both of her hands tightly over her face. The social humiliation was simply too intense. For the first time in her entire life, Eleanor Washington was not rushing forward to shield her favorite daughter from the consequences of her own actions. Liam, however, could not afford to hide behind his hands. His entire existence was currently dangling over a steep financial cliff, and he could feel the ropes snapping one by one. The $400,000 he had embezzled from his real estate firm was a ticking time bomb. If he did not secure the equity from my house, he was going straight to a federal penitentiary. Pure primal survival instinct kicked in, overriding whatever tiny shred of logical reasoning he had left in his brain. He stormed forward, shoving past Chloe and stomping directly toward the center of the altar. His face was flushed with a frantic, desperate rage. Thick blue veins bulged against the tight white collar of his dress shirt. He pointed a rigid, shaking finger aggressively at the glowing projection screen behind me. "This is a complete fabrication!" Liam roared, his voice booming across the sanctuary without a microphone. He turned to face the congregation, sweeping his arm wildly through the air. "Do not listen to a single word this woman is saying. She works in corporate strategy. She knows how to manipulate data. She hired someone to Photoshop those medical records. She faked the hospital logo. She typed up those documents on her computer just to humiliate my wife." I stood perfectly still, letting his frantic accusations wash over me. I did not interrupt him. I wanted every single person in that building to witness his absolute desperation. I wanted them to see the ugly, frantic core of the man my father had deemed a superior addition to our family simply because of his race and his supposed country club pedigree. Liam spun back to face me, stepping so close I could smell the stale coffee on his breath. "You are a bitter, jealous woman, Maya," he spat, leaning forward to physically intimidate me. "You are so consumed by grief and jealousy that you are willing to commit fraud. just to leave an innocent baby out on the street. You could never give Marcus a child, so you are trying to destroy the woman who did. He reached into the manila folder he had been gripping like a life preserver. He pulled out the forged will, violently shaking the crumpled paper in the air for the entire church to see. "I have the absolute proof right here in my hand," Liam screamed, waving the paper frantically. "I have the legally binding document that Marcus wrote himself. He signed this paper with his own hand. He explicitly left half of that estate to Chloe to care for his son. Why would a man write a legal will giving away half of a multi-million-dollar asset if he did not believe the child was his? He knew the boy was his blood. He wanted to protect his legacy. This will prove his intent. This will prove exactly what he wanted to happen to his house." He slammed his fist against the wooden edge of the altar, the loud thud echoing sharply. "You cannot erase a man's final dying wish with some fake hospital printout." Liam continued, his chest heaving as he gasped for breath. "The law does not care about your photoshopped presentation. The law cares about legal documents. And I have the legal document right here. We are taking you to probate court, Maya. We will have a judge throw out your fake medical files, and we will seize the property just like Marcus intended." I looked at the crumpled piece of copy paper shaking in his sweaty fist. My heart beat with a steady, rhythmic calm. Liam was so blinded by his own arrogance and his desperate need to escape prison that he had entirely missed the fatal flaw in his argument. He was doubling down on the forged will in front of hundreds of witnesses, actively cementing his connection to a fraudulent document. He was publicly tying himself to a federal crime right here on holy ground. I let his shouting echo through the high vaulted ceilings of the church. I waited for the last syllable of his threat to completely fade into the shocked silence of the congregation. I looked down at the off-duty police officers, who were now standing alert at the edge of the center aisle, their hands resting near their duty belts. Then I looked back at Liam, tilting my head slightly. "Are you absolutely certain you want to rely on that specific piece of paper?" "Liam," I asked, my voice cutting through the heavy tension like a steel blade, "are you willing to stake your entire freedom on the legal validity of that will?" "It is perfectly valid," Liam snarled, shoving the paper closer to my face. "It is a legally binding instrument, and it proves he owned the house and wanted Chloe to have it." I smiled, pressing the button on my presentation remote. The trap was ready to snap completely shut. The massive screens behind me flickered, and the blue and white logo of Johns Hopkins Hospital vanished. In its place, a crisp, high-contrast scan of an official Fulton County property deed appeared. The heavy black text was magnified so large that even the congregation sitting in the very last row of the balcony could read every single line. I turned back to face Liam, watching his arrogant sneer falter as his eyes darted across the projected document. "You claim to be a highly successful real estate broker, Liam," I said, my voice ringing with absolute authority. "You bragged to me in a coffee shop about your vast industry network and your deep understanding of complex assets. You practically demanded that I hand over my estate to you because I am just a simple corporate employee who lacks the intellectual capacity to grasp property laws." I slowly paced across the altar, forcing him to turn and track my movements. "So tell me, Liam, as a premier real estate professional, what exactly is the very first thing you are supposed to check before you attempt to transfer a multi-million-dollar property?" Liam swallowed hard, his chest rising and falling rapidly. He did not answer. He was staring at the massive screen, his eyes locked on the top right corner of the deed, where the ownership details were officially recorded. "You check the title," I stated, answering my own question. "You check the legal deed to verify who actually owns the asset. If you had bothered to do the most basic fundamental task of your supposed profession before you launched a public harassment campaign against a grieving widow, you would have discovered a very interesting fact." I pointed my remote at the screen, highlighting a specific block of text in bright yellow. "I bought that house 3 years before I ever met Marcus." I announced the truth, crashing over the silent sanctuary. "I did not buy it under the name Maya Washington. I am a corporate risk strategist. I protect my assets. I purchased that $900,000 property entirely under a limited liability company called MW Holdings LLC. I am the sole managing member and the exclusive shareholder of that entity. The congregation erupted into a fresh wave of shocked whispers. Chloe let out a tiny, pathetic gasp, clutching her baby as if the floor beneath her was suddenly crumbling. My father. Pastor Thomas sank heavily onto the wooden pew behind him, completely defeated by his own ignorance. Marcus never owned that house. I continued, my voice rising above the crowd noise to ensure every single syllable struck its target. His name was never on the mortgage. His name was never on the title. His name was never on the deed. He contributed to the household expenses as my husband, but he possessed absolutely zero legal ownership of the property. I walked directly up to Liam, stopping just inches away from his sweating face. I looked down at the crumpled piece of copy paper he was still clutching in his shaking fist. "A man cannot bequeath an asset he does not legally own, Liam," I said, my tone dropping to a dangerous whisper that still carried perfectly over the microphone. Marcus could not have left half of that house to your wife because Marcus did not own a single brick of it. MW Holdings, LLC owns it. That means the document you are holding in your hand right now, the document you just proudly displayed to hundreds of witnesses claiming it to be an authentic representation of my late husband's. Final Wishes is a complete and absolute fabrication. Liam stepped backward, stumbling slightly over the edge of the altar carpet. His chest was heaving and a thick sheen of sweat coated his forehead. He looked at his wife and then back at the glowing screen. The reality of his catastrophic failure was finally penetrating his thick skull. I stepped back to the center of the stage, addressing the entire room. "You brought a fake lawyer to my living room," I declared loudly. "You demanded that I sign a quitclaim deed to surrender my corporate asset to your wife. But worst of all, you actually emailed and couriered this forged document to a licensed attorney at a premier litigation firm hoping to legitimize your scam." I pulled a second document from my leather binder and held it up. It was the forensic analysis report from Evelyn's office. "My legal team analyzed your little arts and crafts project, Liam. The notary seal on your document belongs to a woman who died 3 years ago. The witnesses do not exist. The signature was traced. You fabricated a legal instrument to steal a $900,000 property from a limited liability company. Under federal law, that is not just a family dispute. That is attempted grand larceny. When you transmitted that forged document across digital networks to my attorney, you committed wire fraud. When you used a physical courier to deliver it, you committed mail fraud." The silence in the church was deafening. The congregation was watching a man realize his life was over in real time. "You thought you could intimidate me because I am a black woman grieving her husband," I said, staring directly into his terrified blue eyes. "You thought your race, your gender, and your country club connections would automatically give you the upper hand in a legal battle. You thought I was weak. But you are just a desperate, drowning man who is about to be indicted for embezzling $400,000 from his own brokerage firm." A woman in the choir screamed. Liam dropped the forged will. The paper fluttered to the wooden floor, landing right between us. He looked around wildly like a trapped rat, calculating if he could make it to the sanctuary doors before police intercepted him. He had gambled his entire existence on a single fake paper and lost absolutely everything. Liam's knees buckled slightly, his polished leather shoes slipping on the discarded forged will. He stared at the piece of paper as if it had suddenly burst into flames. The man who had strutted into my home with a fake lawyer and a laser measuring tape, the man who had threatened to ruin me in a downtown coffee shop, was now visibly shrinking before my eyes. "You're bluffing!" Liam stammered, his voice cracking, devoid of its usual arrogant resonance. "This is a trick. You manufactured that report. You're trying to scare me." "I don't need to scare you, Liam," I replied, my voice steady and amplified across the sanctuary. "The federal penal code does that all on its own. Forgery is a felony. Submitting a forged document to a licensed attorney to execute a real estate transfer is mail and wire fraud. That's another felony. And attempting to steal an asset valued at $900,000 constitutes grand larceny. You didn't just make a mistake. You orchestrated a multi-million-dollar heist, and you left a paper trail so clear a first-year law student could convict you." The congregation erupted again, the murmurs escalating into loud, shocked exclamations. Several church elders, men who had previously nodded along with my father's sermons on grace and forgiveness, were now shaking their heads in absolute disgust. "He tried to steal her house," a woman's voice carried from the middle pews. "They tried to rob a widow." I turned my attention to Chloe, who was now weeping genuinely, her perfectly contoured face streaked with black mascara. She clung to her baby, looking wildly around the room for an escape route that didn't exist. "And you, Chloe," I said, ensuring the microphone caught every syllable. "You stood before this congregation you posted on the internet, and you swore before God that you had an affair with a man who loved me deeply. You dragged his name through the mud, branding him a liar and a cheat just to get your hands on my property. You weaponized your own child to extort me." "I didn't know," Chloe wailed, her voice shrill and desperate. "Liam told me the will was real. He said Marcus gave it to him. I thought Marcus wanted to take care of us." Liam spun around, his face contorted with panic and rage. "Shut up, Chloe. Don't you dare pin this on me. You were right there when we printed it." The golden couple was turning on each other, their perfect facade crumbling into a pathetic display of self-preservation. They were rats trapped on a sinking ship, biting at one another to stay above water. I looked at my mother, Eleanor. She had remained seated, her face buried in her hands. The social humiliation she had always feared was now raining down upon her, inescapable and absolute. The perfect family she had meticulously curated, the image she had sacrificed my well-being to protect, was shattered beyond repair. "You knew," I said, directing my words to my parents. "You knew Chloe was lying, or at the very least you didn't care if she was. You were willing to let Liam intimidate me into signing away my home just to avoid a scandal. You chose the appearance of propriety over the truth. You chose them over me." Pastor Thomas stood frozen at the pulpit, his knuckles white as he gripped the wood. He looked out at his congregation, the people who looked to him for moral guidance and saw only judgment in their eyes. The moral high ground he had always claimed was gone, replaced by the ugly reality of his complicity. "Maya, please, my father," rasped his voice, sounding hollow and old. "This is a family matter. We can resolve this privately. Don't do this here." "You made this public when you allowed Chloe to post her lies online," I countered, my voice sharp and unforgiving. "You made this public when you called me up here to surrender my home in front of your congregation. I'm just finishing the conversation you started." I turned back to Liam, who was frantically wiping sweat from his brow, his eyes darting toward the exits. The two off-duty officers had moved closer to the center aisle, their presence a silent, imposing barrier. "You threatened to ruin me, Liam," I reminded him, recalling his vicious words in the coffee shop. "You said the legal system would always side with a well-connected white businessman over a single black widow. You bet on systemic bias to protect you. But you forgot one crucial detail. The system only protects you if you're smart enough not to hand over the evidence yourself." I picked up the forged will from the floor, holding it between two fingers, like a contaminated piece of evidence. "You emailed this to my attorney," I said, dropping the paper back onto the altar. "You used a courier to deliver it. You established the timeline, the intent, and the execution of your own crime. My legal team didn't have to dig for proof. You handed it to them on a silver platter." The sanctuary was now filled with the angry hum of a community realizing they had been deceived. The whispers were no longer just shocked, they were furious. The illusion of the Golden family was dead, replaced by the stark reality of greed and manipulation. Liam took a step toward me, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "Maya, listen. We can work this out. I'll withdraw the claim. We'll say it was a misunderstanding. I'll publicly apologize. Just don't go to the police, please." His arrogance had completely vanished, replaced by the pathetic pleading of a man facing the destruction of his life. But there was no mercy left in me. They had drained that well dry. "It's too late for apologies, Liam," I said coldly. "The documents are already with the authorities. You're not just dealing with me anymore. You're dealing with the federal government." The finality of my words struck him like a physical blow. He stumbled backward, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. The grand illusion he had built, the entire foundation of his entitlement, was collapsing around him. But I wasn't finished. I still had one final piece of evidence, the most devastating truth of all, waiting to be unleashed. The grand finale of their destruction was yet to come. I let Liam's stunned silence hang in the air, a physical weight pressing down on the congregation. He had no defense. He had no counter-argument. He was staring at the undeniable proof of his own federal crimes, projected in high definition for his entire community to see. The arrogant, wealthy real estate broker who had marched into my home and threatened to ruin my life was completely paralyzed by the trap he had eagerly walked into. But the destruction was not yet complete. I had dismantled his financial scheme, exposed his crimes, and cleared my late husband's name. Now it was time to address the final, most disgusting lie of all, the lie that had started this entire spectacle. Chloe was hyperventilating, clutching her baby so tightly the infant began to cry again. She looked wildly around the sanctuary, her eyes wide with animalistic panic. She realized that Liam's failure meant her own ruin. The massive house, the inherited wealth, the perfect narrative she had constructed, it was all disintegrating. Liam is right. Chloe suddenly screamed, her voice shrill and desperate, piercing the tense silence. She manufactured everything. Maya is trying to frame us because she's jealous. She's always been jealous of me. She couldn't give Marcus a child, so she's trying to steal mine. She turned to the congregation, her face streaked with tears and smeared makeup, pleading with the very people she had manipulated just 24 hours earlier. "Please, you have to believe me," she wailed, adopting the role of the persecuted victim with practiced ease. "Marcus loved me. He wanted this baby. Maya is a liar. She's a monster." I didn't react to her hysteria. I didn't raise my voice or rush forward to defend myself. I simply reached into the inner pocket of my tailored suit jacket. My hand closed around the thick, sterile envelope I had retrieved from the medical testing facility on Friday afternoon. "A monster, Chloe!" I asked, my voice calm, projecting clearly over her frantic sobbing. "I'm not the one who dragged a dead man's name through the mud to steal a house. I'm not the one who used her own child as a weapon of extortion." I pulled the envelope from my pocket, the crisp white paper standing out starkly against my navy suit. I held it up, holding it perfectly still, so everyone in the room could see the official seal of the independent testing laboratory. "You stood before this congregation today and swore before God that Marcus was the father of your child," I said, stepping away from the microphone and walking slowly down the altar steps toward where Liam and Chloe stood. "You built a massive public lie on the foundation of a DNA connection that never existed." Chloe froze, her sobs abruptly cutting off as she stared at the envelope in my hand. The blood drained completely from her face, leaving her looking hollow and terrified. "But if Marcus isn't the father," I continued, my voice echoing in the vast silent church, "then who is?" I stopped directly in front of Liam. He was staring at the envelope, his brow furrowed in confusion. The arrogance had been completely wiped from his face, replaced by a deep, unsettling dread. "You see, Liam," I said, looking directly into his eyes, "when you met me at that coffee shop to threaten my livelihood, you were incredibly careless. You were so focused on intimidating the grieving widow that you didn't notice me collect a sample of your DNA from your coat." Liam flinched instinctively, taking a step back. "What are you talking about?" he rasped. "And Chloe," I turned my gaze to my sister, who was now trembling visibly. "When you broke into my house to measure my walls for your new nursery, you left the baby's beanie on my console table. It was careless. But as I said, arrogance breeds carelessness." I held the envelope out to Liam. He didn't move to take it. He stared at it as if it were a venomous snake preparing to strike. "Take it, Liam," I commanded, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. "Open it. Read the scientific truth about the family you've been using to try and steal my home." His hands shook uncontrollably as he finally reached out and took the envelope. He fumbled with the seal, tearing the paper in his haste. He pulled out the multi-page report, his eyes scanning the technical data, desperate to find the conclusion. I didn't wait for him to read it. I turned to face the congregation, delivering the final devastating blow. "The DNA test results are conclusive," I announced, my voice ringing with absolute finality. They confirm what the Johns Hopkins medical records already proved. Marcus Washington is not the father of that child. I paused, letting the silence stretch, building the tension until it was nearly unbearable. I turned back to Liam, watching his face contort as he read the final paragraph of the report. But the results also confirmed something else, Liam, I said softly, ensuring the microphone caught my words. Something much more interesting. You are not the father either. A gasp rippled through the church, louder and more shocked than any previous reaction. Chloe let out a strangled cry and buried her face in the baby's blanket. Liam's head snapped up, his eyes wide and completely devoid of comprehension. What he choked out, staring at the paper in his hand. What does this mean? It means, I said, stepping closer to him, that your wife has been lying to you too. It means the child you used to justify your multi-million-dollar fraud isn't even yours. Liam looked at Chloe, his face contorting with a sudden, violent realization. Who is it? He demanded, his voice a low, terrifying growl. If it's not Marcus and it's not me who is the father. Chloe shook her head frantically, refusing to meet his gaze. Liam, please, it's not what you think. I know exactly who it is, I stated, cutting through her pathetic defense. I turned back to the microphone, ready to drop the final piece of evidence that would annihilate their entire world. You see, Liam, I didn't just run a simple paternity test. I ran a comprehensive genetic profile against public databases. And it turns out the father of your wife's child is someone you know very, very well. I paused, relishing the look of absolute terror on Chloe's face. The biological father of that baby, I announced, the words echoing like a gunshot, is Richard Vance, your managing broker, your boss. The name Richard Vance hung in the air like a guillotine blade that had just been dropped. For a split second, absolute silence reigned in the sanctuary. It was the kind of quiet that precedes a catastrophic natural disaster. Liam stood perfectly still, his body rigidly locked, as his brain struggled to process the devastating magnitude of the betrayal. The man he idolized, the managing broker, whose approval he desperately sought, was the biological father of his supposed son. He had been raising his boss's child while his boss allowed him to drown in $400,000 of embezzled debt. He had been the ultimate gullible pawn in a deeply twisted corporate and domestic game. Liam slowly turned his head toward Chloe. His face had drained of all color, leaving him looking like a chalk-white ghost. His jaw hung slack, his eyes wide with a terrifying blank stare. Chloe shrank back against the wooden communion table, clutching the baby so tightly against her chest that the infant began to let out sharp, distressed wails. She shook her head frantically, her perfectly styled blonde curls flying wildly around her face. Liam, please, she whimpered, her voice cracking under the intense strain of her own deception. It was only one time. I was lonely. You were always working. You were always stressed about money. Richard was just there. He listened to me. I swear I didn't know for sure whose baby it was until just now. I wanted him to be yours. I wanted us to be a family. The dam finally broke. The fragile thread holding Liam's sanity together completely snapped. The realization that his wife had slept with his boss, combined with the sheer terror of his impending federal indictment and the public exposure of his multi-million-dollar fraud, ignited a volatile, explosive rage within him. He was a man who had built his entire identity on control, arrogance, and perceived superiority. Now he was nothing more than a publicly humiliated cuckold facing federal prison. You lying, cheating witch! Liam roared, a guttural, primal scream that tore through the sacred silence of the church. You used me. You let me plan a future with another man's bastard. You let me risk a federal prison sentence to steal a house for Richard Vance's kid. You set me up. He lunged forward, closing the short distance between them with terrifying speed. He grabbed Chloe by the shoulders of her expensive silk dress, his fingers digging violently into the fabric. The sudden aggressive movement caused the baby to shriek in terror. Chloe screamed, trying to twist out of his grasp, but Liam was significantly larger and fueled by pure, unadulterated fury. He shook her violently, her head snapping back and forth. Liam, stop my mother! Eleanor shrieked, surging forward from the front pew. Let her go. You are hurting the baby. My father. Pastor Thomas finally snapped out of his paralyzed state. He rushed the altar, trying to wedge himself between the violent couple. Liam, step back right now, my father commanded, attempting to use his pastoral authority to diffuse the escalating violence. This is a house of God. You will not behave this way here. Liam didn't even look at my father. He violently shoved the older man backward with one hand, sending the pastor stumbling into the wooden pulpit. Pastor Thomas crashed hard against the polished wood, gasping for breath as he slid down onto the carpeted altar floor. The congregation erupted into pure chaos. People were screaming, jumping out of their pews and scrambling toward the aisles. The two off-duty police officers I had spoken to earlier finally drew their weapons and sprinted down the center aisle, shouting verbal commands for Liam to stand down. But Liam was completely deaf to the world around him. He spun Chloe around, slamming her hard against the communion table. The decorative cross and the silver offering plates clattered to the floor, echoing loudly through the massive sanctuary. I gave you everything, Liam screamed, his face inches from hers, spit flying from his lips. I bought you the country club membership. I bought you the designer clothes. I stole $400,000 to keep you happy. I ruined my entire life for you, and you were sleeping with Richard. Chloe shoved him back with her free hand, her survival instincts finally overriding her panic. She clawed at his face, her manicured nails leaving deep red scratches down his cheek. You ruined your own life, Liam, she shrieked back, her voice raw and hateful. You were a pathetic failure long before Richard ever touched me. You couldn't afford the lifestyle you promised me. You are a broke, pathetic loser. The insult pushed Liam past the point of no return. He raised his hand, balling his fist, preparing to strike his wife directly in the face. Police, drop to the ground right now, the lead officer commanded, rushing the altar with his taser drawn. Get on the ground. Liam froze, his fists suspended midair. He looked at the officers, then at the screaming congregation, and finally down at his terrified, weeping wife. The reality of his situation crashed down upon him. He was standing on the altar of a church surrounded by hundreds of witnesses, about to assault the mother of a child that wasn't his, while facing an imminent federal indictment for embezzlement and real estate fraud. He was completely and utterly destroyed. He dropped his arms, taking a staggering step backward. His chest heaved as he gasped for air, looking wildly around the sanctuary. He looked at me, standing calmly by the projection screen, clutching my leather binder of evidence. You did this, he rasped, his voice hoarse and broken. You planned all of this. You destroyed my life. I didn't destroy your life, Liam, I replied, my voice perfectly steady, cutting through the ambient noise of the panicking church. I simply forced you to look at the destruction you caused yourself. You chose to embezzle the money. You chose to forge the will. You chose to threaten a grieving widow. I just brought the receipts. The officers moved in quickly, grabbing Liam by the arms and forcing him face down onto the plush carpet of the altar. They snapped cold steel handcuffs around his wrists, the metallic click echoing sharply. Chloe collapsed against the communion table, sobbing hysterically, clutching the baby as if it could somehow shield her from the devastating consequences of her own lies. My parents were huddled together near the pulpit, their perfect, flawless reputation completely shattered in front of their entire congregation. I stood tall amidst the absolute ruin, feeling nothing but a cold, satisfying sense of absolute justice. The final act was upon us, and the cleanup was going to be glorious. The sharp, metallic click of the handcuffs echoing across the altar was immediately swallowed by a new, far more terrifying sound. From the distance, the high-pitched, unmistakable wail of police sirens pierced the quiet Sunday morning air. The congregation froze in place, heads turning in unison toward the heavy oak doors at the back of the sanctuary. The sirens grew exponentially louder, multiplying in number until a deafening roar surrounded the building entirely. Vivid flashes of red and blue light began to strobe aggressively through the magnificent stained glass windows, painting the terrified faces of the churchgoers in alternating frantic neon colors. Liam jerked his head up from the carpet, his cheek bruised and pressed painfully against the floor. He strained against the relentless grip of the off-duty officers holding him down. "What did you do?" he wheezed, spit flying from his lips as his eyes darted wildly. "What did you do to me?" I looked down at him, my expression completely devoid of pity. "Did you honestly think I spent the last 3 days just putting together a presentation for the church choir, Liam?" I asked, my voice cutting through the rising panic in the room like a blade. "I am a corporate risk strategist. When I find a threat, I eliminate it permanently." On Friday afternoon, I handed my entire dossier, the forensic analysis of your forged will, your financial background check, the proof of your embezzlement, and the LLC documents directly to the district attorney and the local field office of the FBI. Chloe let out a blood-curdling shriek from her place against the communion table. "No, Maya, no, you cannot do this." The heavy double doors at the back of the sanctuary burst open with a violent crash. A specialized team of uniformed police officers, led by two sharp-suited plainclothes detectives, marched down the center aisle. The congregation scrambled out of their way, in sheer panic, pressing themselves desperately against the wooden pews to avoid the authorities. The lead detective, a tall, imposing woman with a gold badge clipped to her belt, approached the altar with absolute, unwavering authority. "William Liam Carter." The detective announced, her voice booming across the silent church without needing a microphone. "You are under arrest for wire fraud, mail fraud, and attempted grand larceny. We also have a federal warrant for your arrest regarding the embezzlement of $400,000 from your brokerage firm." The officers hauled Liam roughly to his feet. His legs wobbled uncontrollably, failing to support his own weight. The sheer crushing reality of his destroyed life had completely paralyzed him. He did not fight back. He did not speak. He simply stared blankly at the floor as they read him his Miranda rights, his arrogant facade reduced to absolute ash. The second detective turned his attention to my sister, pulling a set of handcuffs from his belt. "Chloe Washington Carter, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud and uttering a forged document." "No!" Chloe screamed, thrashing wildly as the officer approached her. She clutched her crying infant so aggressively that my mother finally lunged forward, prying the hysterical baby from her arms to protect him from being crushed. "I am a mother. I did not know. Liam made me do it." "Maya, tell them. Tell them it is a massive misunderstanding." The officer firmly grabbed Chloe's wrists, pulling them behind her back and securing them in cold steel cuffs. Her designer silk dress tore slightly at the shoulder as she struggled, a fitting physical manifestation of her ruined superficial image. She sobbed uncontrollably, expensive mascara running down her cheeks in thick, dark rivers as they began to march her down the aisle toward the flashing lights outside. Pastor Thomas and Eleanor finally snapped out of their shock. The horrific sight of their golden child being hauled away in handcuffs finally broke the spell of their social paralysis. They rushed toward me, their faces contorted in absolute raw desperation. The perfect pastoral facade was completely obliterated. My father's suit was wrinkled, his tie askew, and heavy sweat poured down his forehead. "Maya, please," my father begged, his voice cracking with panic. He reached out to grab my hands, but I stepped back swiftly, refusing to let him touch me. "You have to stop this immediately. Tell the detectives you want to drop the charges. Tell them it was a family dispute that got completely out of hand. We can handle this internally. You cannot let them take your sister to prison." My mother fell to her knees right there on the altar, clutching the crying baby to her chest. "Maya, I am begging you," she wept, her voice echoing with raw, pathetic desperation. "She is just a foolish girl. She made a terrible mistake. Liam manipulated her into doing this. You have your beautiful house. You proved your point. You won. Just tell them to let her go. Think of the baby. Think of our family." I looked down at the woman who had birthed me, the woman who had spent my entire life making me feel invisible. I looked at the man who had weaponized the word of God just 48 hours ago to force me into giving up my sanctuary. They were not begging for my sister's soul. They were begging for their own reputations. They were terrified of the church gossip, the lost donations, and the absolute humiliation of being exposed as frauds in front of their congregation. "She did not make a mistake. I said, my voice ringing out with crystal clear precision, ensuring every single member of the congregation heard my final verdict. A mistake is forgetting to return a phone call. What Chloe did was a calculated, malicious choice. She chose to desecrate Marcuse's memory. She chose to fabricate a disgusting affair. She chose to forge a legal document to steal my home and leave me with nothing. She made her bed, and now she is going to sleep in a federal prison cell. My father gasped, clutching his chest, as if I had physically struck him. Maya, you are destroying us. The church, the community, our entire legacy. How will we ever explain this to our congregation? I adjusted the grip on my leather binder and looked out at the hundreds of wide-eyed church members watching the spectacle unfold. You wanted to protect the family image so badly, I said, my tone as cold and unforgiving as a winter storm. You wanted to protect the church's reputation at my expense. Well, here is your beloved congregation, Pastor Thomas. They are all watching you. Explain your legacy to them, save your reputation on your own. Because as of this exact moment, I am no longer a part of this family. I turned my back on my weeping parents and the utter ruins of their golden child. I walked down the center aisle of the sanctuary, my heels clicking rhythmically against the polished wood. The congregation parted for me, stepping aside with a mixture of awe and absolute terror. I walked out the heavy oak doors, stepping into the bright, cleansing sunlight of the Sunday afternoon, leaving the toxic wreckage of my past entirely behind me. 6 months passed since that explosive Sunday morning, and the dust had finally settled, leaving a landscape completely unrecognizable from the one I had known. The legal proceedings had moved with surprising speed, a testament to the undeniable, meticulously documented evidence I had handed over to the authorities. The federal prosecutors did not even have to work hard. Liam's arrogance had done their jobs for them. Liam Carter's trial was a public spectacle, a rapid descent from the country club elite to the stark reality of a federal penitentiary. The $400,000 embezzlement charge carried a significant sentence on its own, but the added charges of mail fraud, wire fraud, and attempted grand larceny elevated his punishment to a different tier. His family's connections and wealth, the very things my father had worshipped, proved useless against a mountain of digital and forensic proof. He was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison, stripped of his real estate license, and ordered to pay full restitution to his former brokerage firm. The golden son-in-law was gone, replaced by an inmate number. Chloe's downfall was equally swift and utterly devastating. Without Liam's least luxury and the protection of his name, her entire fabricated world collapsed. She had attempted to play the victim, claiming Liam had coerced her into the fraud, but the text messages Evelyn's investigators uncovered proved she was a willing, eager participant in the scheme to steal my home. While she managed to avoid prison time by accepting a plea deal and cooperating with the prosecutors, her social and financial ruin was absolute. The revelation regarding the baby's true parentage was the final nail in the coffin. Richard Vance, Liam's former boss, had initially denied the affair, but the DNA evidence was irrefutable. Richard's wife filed for a highly publicized, incredibly messy divorce, freezing his assets and dragging his name through the local media. Richard wanted absolutely nothing to do with Chloe, or the child, viewing them only as the catalysts for his own destruction. He agreed to pay the bare minimum required for child support, but explicitly severed all contact. Left with a fraction of the lifestyle she felt entitled to, Chloe was forced to find actual employment. The former church pageant queen, the golden child who had never worked a day in her life, was now ringing up customers at a discount retail store on the outskirts of the city. She lived in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment, a far cry from the sprawling suburban estates she used to critique. The irony of her situation was not lost on me. She had tried to leave me homeless, and now she was struggling to make rent. The fallout for my parents was perhaps the most poetic justice of all. Pastor Thomas and Eleanor had built their entire identities on the foundation of their flawless, righteous image. That image was completely obliterated the moment Liam was hauled out of their sanctuary in handcuffs. The congregation, horrified by the depth of the deception and my parents' complicity in attempting to cover it up, demanded accountability. A special meeting of the church elders was convened 3 days after the incident. They did not mince words. Pastor Thomas and Eleanor were asked to resign immediately. The community they had meticulously cultivated, the people they had tried to impress by sacrificing my well-being, turned their backs on them completely. They were forced to sell their large home and relocate to a smaller, quieter town a few hours away, desperate to escape the relentless gossip and the undeniable shame of their actions. In a final, desperate attempt to save face, they officially disowned Chloe, publicly declaring they could not associate with someone who had brought such dishonor to the family name. They had turned on their golden child the moment her shine faded, proving their love had always been entirely conditional. As for me, my life had never been more peaceful. I had taken a much-needed sabbatical from my demanding corporate job, using the time to heal properly from the loss of Marcus and the toxic fallout of my family. The silence in my $900,000 home, which had once felt oppressive, was now a comforting, protective embrace. I sat on the expansive back balcony of my home, the warm Atlanta evening breeze gently rustling the leaves of the ancient oak trees in my backyard. The house was mine. The sanctuary Marcus and I had built was entirely irrevocably secure. The legal entity MW Holdings LLC stood as a fortress against any future attempts to challenge my independence. I poured a glass of robust red wine, the deep crimson catching the light from the setting sun. I looked out over the manicured lawn, feeling a profound sense of clarity and strength. The people who had tried to break me, who had tried to erase my husband's memory and steal my security, had ultimately destroyed themselves. Their greed, their arrogance, and their desperate need for social validation had been their own undoing. I raised my glass, the crystal cool, against my fingers. I didn't raise it to vengeance or to the ruin of those who had wronged me. I raised it to the man who had loved me unconditionally, who had seen my worth when my own family refused to acknowledge it. "Thank you, Marcus," I whispered into the quiet evening air. "Thank you for the love and thank you for the strength." I took a slow sip of the wine, the complex flavors settling on my tongue. I was 34 years old, entirely independent, and completely free. The toxic chains of family expectation and emotional manipulation had been shattered, leaving me to build a future defined entirely by my own terms. The storm had passed, and the horizon was beautifully, perfectly clear. The story of Maya powerfully illustrates that true strength does not require screaming, defending yourself to the masses, or begging for validation. Rather, it is found in strategic silence and impenetrable boundaries. When Maya was subjected to a coordinated malicious attack by her own sister and brother-in-law, her initial instinct wasn't to lash out emotionally. Instead, she recognized that her toxic family members were blinded by their own arrogance and greed. By allowing them to believe they had the upper hand, she gave them the rope they needed to dismantle their own lives. The most resonant lesson from Maya's journey is the importance of protecting your peace and your assets with cold, calculated facts rather than emotional pleas. In a society that often pressures women, especially in tight-knit community or church environments, to compromise their own well-being to keep the peace or save face, Maya chose a radically different path. She meticulously gathered undeniable evidence, forensic reports, medical records, and DNA results. She understood that toxic people will always attempt to manipulate the narrative, gaslight their victims, and weaponize community pressure. The only way to permanently stop such abuse is by refusing to play their game. Maya's triumph was not merely about saving her home, it was about the absolute reclamation of her personal power. She demonstrated that you owe no loyalty to people who view your grief as an opportunity for exploitation, even if they share your blood. By stepping away from the chaotic noise of her detractors, she preserved her husband's memory and secured her own future. If you ever find yourself surrounded by manipulation and toxic expectations, stop trying to reason with those committed to misunderstanding you, and instead focus on quietly gathering the strength to walk away on your own terms.